Thank you guys for joining today. We are talking about assessing your job search strategy and how to pivot to a plan B. I'm joined here with my colleague Alex from the London campus, and together we're going to present this content to you. Before we dive into the content, just wanted to introduce myself a little bit, and Alex, of course, so you understand our background before we go over the agenda. So my name is Tom Lynch. I'm the Career Development Manager in the Boston campus. I work mainly with the BBA students and the Master of Finance students, and I'll be going into my 5th academic year with Hult. Prior to Hult, I worked in accounting for many years within educational travel, and then made the pivot to marketing within IT. And so with that experience and those skills, I've combined those to work with students like yourselves on career preparation and career development. And really looking forward to the presentation today, answering your questions and hopefully creating some awarenesses around the job search.
Thanks, and I'm Alexandra, but please feel free to call me Alex. So I'm a career advisor for the PG London campus. I joined Hult actually last March, so I actually spent 2 weeks in the office before the campus was shut down because of the lockdown. So it's been an interesting start of my Hult journey, but I couldn't be happier to be here. Before joining Hult, I was working at the Boston Consulting Group. I was a recruiter in their in-house recruiting team in the London office. And I spent most of my time while I was at BCG to run their MBA recruiting channel. And more recently, I also completed a qualification in transformational coaching. And that's me.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Alex. And again, as a reminder, we are joined by Jax, who will be monitoring the chat. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and Jax will make sure that we get your questions answered. So Alex, if we want to go to the agenda, we'll cover what we're going to present today. Perfect. So today, we're assuming most of you, have some concerns about where you might be in the job search today. So that's the goal is really identifying where you are in the job search. So we're going to cover what potential outcomes there are in evaluating or assessing the job search. What is a plan B? So if you are hearing about a plan B for the first time, we'll talk about what a plan B is. And then we'll talk about actually how to evaluate your job search. Then we'll go into the actual pivoting and steps needed to pivot to plan B, if that's something that makes sense for your strategy. And then we're going to talk about keeping a positive mindset throughout this process. And it's not always easy, right? And Alex is going to give some great tips on how to create some awarenesses around that and how to keep positive. Some common mistakes to avoid, and then we'll open up to Q&A. Okay, perfect. So Alex, if you want to kind of talk about what a plan B is.
Yeah, of course. So what is a plan B? I think everybody knows it's a fallback option in case your plan A didn't quite work out the way you were hoping to. But what is interesting is that a plan B can be very different to each and every one of you. So for some people, it will be something that they already have on the back of their mind and that they're ready to put into action straight away. For some people, it's something that is completely unclear and that they have to figure out. For some people, it will be a very small change, and maybe just a change in their target geography. For example, I'm thinking of people who were hoping to have an international career and actually are deciding to go back to their home country because they think that maybe if they join their local market, it will be a bit easier because then they can leverage their language skills and their experience there. And then for some people, it will be taking a completely new direction. So whatever your situation is, what I'm going to try to do in that second half of the presentation today is to give you some very practical ideas on how you can structure your search and keep a positive mindset, to make sure that you are successful ultimately in your switch.
So some potential outcomes from today's session, right? So we identified 3. So I will be asking you all a series of questions. And I'll kind of prep you guys now is I would recommend you have a notebook or something to either write on or document some of your notes from today, just because I will be asking some questions. And I think it's helpful if you can write some of your answers down to really reflect on what those answers are and what some of these potential outcomes might mean for you. So you might assess that you are on track and you just keep moving forward. You might just need some more time with the current strategy and the current activity that you're doing. You might realize that you need to adjust your current strategy and plan a little bit, but continue to move forward. You also might realize that you're doing everything you should be doing, but your plan still isn't working. And that's when you might want to really consider moving to that plan B that Alex is going to talk about. So here, those are the 3 potential outcomes from today. And, you know, I say just keep an open mind with the material we're going to present to you today, and figure out what outcome makes the most sense for you. Before we dive into these questions, I do want to give a little bit of kind of a foundation and a little bit of context. So the job search is both quantifiable and qualitative. And what I mean by that is it's not always a numbers game, and it's not always just the strength necessarily of the contacts that you are in touch with. So for example, you may have a friend who has only had maybe a few informational interviews, and we'll talk a little about that in a few minutes. But maybe they landed an internship, or maybe they landed a full-time offer for after graduation. And maybe you've been reaching out to 25 people, right? But it might depend a little bit on the kind of whom you're reaching out to, and you know the strategy behind it and how targeted you are with maybe some of those people. So it's not always more is better. It's the idea that, are you targeting the right people, the right job, etc. So it is both quantifiable and qualitative. And the job search is unique, that Alex was talking about, to each job seeker. So it's very difficult, and you shouldn't do it, but to compare yourself to your friends in their job search, because it really is unique to each individual, their strengths, and what they are targeting. So please keep that in mind as we continue throughout the content. I would like you guys to really treat this as a performance review. So really imagine yourself in a company and you really delivering a performance review of someone's performance. In this case, it's your performance, and it's your job search performance. Now, it's very, very easy, because it's your job search, to not look at it objectively. So there's a few things I'd like to ask you to do. So one is to reflect on all aspects of the job search. And these are going to be a series of questions I'll ask you. Also, answer the questions honestly, right? It's very easy to get defensive because it's your job search, but really just take a step back and look at it and be like, could I do better at that? Is there something else I could be doing within this aspect of the job search? And then be objective if possible, right? It's like I said, it's not always easy, but try to be objective and really look at it almost as a consultant or as somebody who's delivering a performance review. So that is my ask of you guys today. And when you deliver or a performance review, you do have to define the goal or the KPI, the key performance indicator. And what we're really measuring it right now is, I think we can all agree, to receive a job offer that aligns with your skills and interests. So that's the ultimate goal. That's the target. So keep that in mind, right? That's what we're really focusing on. And the series of questions I'm going to ask you momentarily will I hope create some awarenesses on the job search, maybe some things you haven't thought of, and really give you an idea of kind of benchmarking where you are and where you want to be. Okay. I believe I just have one more question before we start the evaluation piece. So take a second to really think to yourself, are you where you want to be in your job search? I'm assuming many of you, the answer will be no, because you are joining this session today. But, I think it's an important and powerful question to really ask yourself is, are you where you want to be? And if not, where do you want to be? What do you want? What would you have liked to accomplish so far in your job search? If it's, obviously the end goal is to have a job offer, but other than that, where really is, what's the goal for you? All right, so now we're going to start evaluating your job search. I'm going to ask you, I believe it's 8 questions, and really think about them and think about what you've done so far. Be objective, and I'll give you some insights into other things to consider. But take some notes on where you stand on these particular questions that I'm going to ask. and then we'll have a moment where you can really think to yourself, what's my next step? So the first question to ask is, are you reaching out to people via LinkedIn, email, etc.? Right? So it doesn't necessarily just have to be these two, but these are, the most common. If there's other ways or other platforms you can access to connect with people, by all means, you can certainly do that. Some channels that you might want to consider, right, would be family and friends. A lot of people forget that. That's a built-in network. So don't forget about family and friends. You have staff and faculty, right? You also have alumni. So there's the Hult network right there that you can tap into. Have you leveraged those channels enough? Previous employers. For those of you who had previous work, have you stayed in touch with your previous employers? Can you continue that conversation? Then I wrote down cold outreach. So identifying those companies that you're really interested in and trying to find some people that are in roles that you would like to be in yourself and just connecting with them, right? So here are some things to consider. And when you're thinking to yourself, have I done enough of this? The question is, how many messages are you really sending out per week? And like I said before, you can't necessarily quantify it. I can't tell you that it's 5 per week or 30 per week that is going to get you that job. But what I can tell you is that students that I've worked with that are the most successful in their job search, do have a solid amount of activity here. And so I probably would say about 5 to 10 messages per week would be a good assessment of students that I see do well in the job search, are around that mark, 5 to 10 or so. And so I'm going to ask you the question too. I'm going to ask it for every slide moving forward for these questions is there room for improvement? After what I've just covered here, can you improve on any of the aspects that I've just covered here? And I would just invite you guys just to write down a few notes, whether it's on your laptop or on a piece of paper, and just be honest. Can you improve here? We'll go to the next question. Have you joined industry associations, LinkedIn groups, etc.? Right? And if yes, and I hope that's a yes for many of you, and if yes, are you consistently engaging in them? Right? And so it's one thing to join a LinkedIn group or an association, but if you don't actively engage in them, they're pretty useless almost. So, I certainly encourage you guys to engage in those. Share content, share an article, respond to somebody's post. You can also, within a LinkedIn group, can message people individually if you're part of the same group, and you don't have to be a connection with them, a first-degree connection. So that's one advantage of a LinkedIn group. So again, other channels to consider would be LinkedIn groups, Hult Connect. If you aren't on Hult Connect yet, I really encourage you to do so. And Jax, if you don't mind just sending out the link to Hult Connect in the chat, that would be wonderful. I'd say our most active alumni are in Hult Connect. It's a great way to connect with Hult alumni. Industry associations, many are free. Some do collect fees. So I would obviously prioritize the ones that are free first. And then meetup.com. Many people consider it mainly for social connections, but there are some great groups on there that have professional connections. And so that's another channel you might want to consider. So again, is there room for improvement? Have you looked at all these channels? Are you consistently engaging in them if you are a member of any of these? Take a second to think about that, and we'll move on to the next question. Thank you, Jax, for doing that. So how many informational interviews have you had? Right, so an informational interview, just to summarize, for those of you who may not know that term, it's basically a conversation. So it's a conversation with somebody at a company that you're interested in, ideally in a role that you are interested in, where you're able to learn what that person does, get some advice on maybe how to get your foot in the door at that company, you learn about the culture of the company. There's a lot you can learn from that. And through that, you can learn to be more strategic in your approach and you can hopefully have an advocate or somebody that can refer you to get into that company. It's all about building rapport and relationships and building that network. So those are called informational interviews. And so how many have you had? Have they been helpful? And have they led to more conversations? So if you're having many informational interviews, but they're not leading maybe to additional ones, then you might want to consider a few things. Are you asking the right questions? Are you asking if there's anyone else at that company that you could speak to? And maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but until you ask that question, you won't know. And so hopefully that person can introduce you to somebody else at that company. If they have not been helpful, again, maybe you're not asking the right questions, and your career advisor can coach you on that. So if you have some concerns about that, please reach out to your advisor and we can help you. But also maybe you're not speaking to the right people, so, are they targeted? Are they the right person? Are they in a role that you're really interested in yourself? And so there's a lot to ask there. Hopefully, the more you do it, the more conversations come from those conversations, and you start building that network. And that's the goal, right? You want to stay top of mind to people that are in your target, career job search. So once again, I'm going to ask, is there room for improvement here? Do you think you're asking the right questions? Are you going on enough informational interviews? And again, I'll just give you a little bit of context, because one of your questions might be, well, how many is enough? And I don't have an answer for that question, but if you maybe have 5 informational interviews, I would say that's probably not enough, right? I would say aim for 20 or more generally, if possible. So when people say do more, we're talking about higher numbers, not just saying, oh, I've done 3 or 4, but nothing's happening. I would say do more than that to really fully assess whether or not these have been helpful and to grow your network, right? So really think on that. Is there room for improvement? So have you connected with staffing firms in your target location, right? So that's another kind of avenue or channel to really look at in your job search. And for those of you who don't really know about staffing firms or recruitment agencies, as they might be called in other locations, you really want to think, you really want to consider maybe tapping into this as a resource. So staffing firms are companies or firms that other companies will reach out to for help on acquiring the right talent to fill a particular role. Now, these companies may not have the resources or capacity to find the talent they need to fulfill a certain role, and so they would reach out to these companies to help them with that. So these staffing firms would then reach out to their candidates. They would look on LinkedIn and other platforms to expand their list of candidates that they think may be a good fit for the particular role in question. And then they would assess, so they would do probably a phone interview or an interview just to get a better understanding of your background. And if they thought you were a good fit, you would then move on to interviewing at the company that's hiring for that role. If you do end up getting the role and getting the job offer, it's important to understand that there is no fee for the candidate, the applicant, which would be you. The company that hired the staffing firm would pay a fee to fill that role. So if any company out there is asking you for fees or guaranteeing you employment on something, be very wary of that and talk to your advisor if you have any concerns because you should not be paying anything to anyone for a guarantee for a job. But this is a really good resource because they are in the know. They have a pulse on the market. And if you connect with them and you showcase your skills and your interests and what you're pursuing, and you consistently, this is super important, guys, consistently follow up with them on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, that can be a really, really helpful resource. A job might pop in that wasn't there last week, and you reach out to them and you might be top of mind now because you've just reached back out to them and they say, actually, something new just came in. Is this of interest to you? So that's one way to approach a job search, one of many. I would not rely on this, but it's certainly something to explore. So if you have not explored this, or maybe you haven't reached out to enough staffing firms. I wouldn't just reach out to one, I'd reach out to multiple, and I'd also do some research on the target locations, right? So if you're looking at certain cities or certain countries, what are the staffing firms that are really popular or targeted towards specific profession? Some concentrated in finance, some concentrated in marketing, etc. So make sure you've done your research. So have you done your research? Have you reached out to these staffing firms? And have you been consistently following up? Is there room for improvement? So have you been submitting applications online? I bet the answer is a big yes from all of you. And that's good. You should be doing some of that. But we are big advocates of the 80-20 rule. So really 80% of your job search should really be that networking piece and some of the things I've covered already, right? Those informational interviews, staffing firms, outreach. So 80% should really cover that number, where maybe about 20% or so should be some online applications. It's just a lot more effective and a lot more efficient going about the job search through networking rather than through online applications. It's also incredibly frustrating. I've been in your shoes and I totally get it. You spend hours on applications, on cover letters, you submit it and you never hear back, right? We don't want you guys to go through that. It's incredibly frustrating and demotivating. So the best way to do it is to really approach it with that networking piece, but it's one aspect of your search and you should do some of it, but are you doing too much of it, right? If you look at that kind of 80-20 rule, are you spending maybe 50% or more on online applications? If you are, I would say that needs to change. So again, is there room for improvement on this? Another question to ask yourself is, are you qualified for the roles you're applying to, right? So if you are applying to some roles or you are reaching out to people and people maybe aren't getting back to you, are you going for the right roles? Does your experience and your skills match the roles you're applying to? Have you done a skills gap analysis? So what that really includes is understanding what the job requires, any prerequisites, any requirements that the role or the company wants for that role. And it could differ per company, to be honest. So you do have to do your research on that. Then identifying, is there a gap there? Do you need to fill that with anything? Is there something that you're missing that's essential to that role? So that's something that's important. If you haven't done that, I highly suggest you do. And again, is there room for improvement? Have you done it? Have you not done it? So kind of reflect on that for a moment. Great. So, we are in interesting times at the moment. The climate is challenging out there. So you do want to take a little temperature check of how healthy is your current target. So when we as career development professionals talk about your career targets, we're really talking about your industry, your role or the function, and your locations, those three pieces. And so have you really looked at what those three are and how has COVID affected those targets? There are some industries that have been severely impacted, and there are some industries out there that are actually thriving in a climate like this. And there's been an increase in some roles and a decrease in other roles. And some locations have been affected more than other locations. So you do really want to do your research and talk to people in that in those targets and hear from them, not just online research, but talk to them and really get their insight into what's going on and get a real pulse. So have you done this? Is there room for improvement on this aspect of your job search? And the final question I'm going to ask you is, how many formal interviews have you been on? So if you've been reaching out a lot and you've been connecting and applying, but there's not a lot of formal interviews, or maybe there's no formal interviews yet, that's just one indicator. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to switch to a plan B, but it's just one indicator to question. There will likely be room for improvement in some of the other aspects of what I covered earlier, if the answer is really low for this question, or maybe 0. But it's just one, again, indication of, where are you in the job search? And if the answer is maybe you've had a lot of interviews, but you haven't landed that job yet, so maybe your job search strategy is great, but maybe you need a little bit of work, and you can work with your career advisor on maybe some of those interview skills. What are some of the questions that stump you? You know, are you showcasing yourself and putting your best foot forward? So we might have some tips and tricks for you to kind of help you take that next step in the interview process. So again, you know, I ask, is there room for improvement here? So those are the questions you really want to ask yourself when you are assessing your job search. Those are the main ones. And so I'm going to ask you guys again, after looking through those questions and really reflecting on it, and I hope you reflect more on it later. I know we're going through this quickly. Are you where you want to be in the job search? And maybe your answer has changed since going through some of those questions. But I will ask you to think on it, and you don't necessarily need to answer it immediately. But what is your next step? After covering those pieces that I just covered, do you think you're on track? And just keep moving forward. Maybe you just need a little more time to keep doing what you're doing. You're doing all the right things. Maybe there's a few that I brought out that you're like, there's a little bit of room for improvement there. I haven't utilized these channels, or I haven't utilized this part of the network, or I haven't done something. So maybe your strategy is pretty good. You just need to do a little bit more of something, or adjust it or tweak it in one way. You may have answered, you know what, I'm doing everything I should be doing. You asked if there's room for improvement, and on the things that I covered, or that you covered, no. The answer was no, there's no room for improvement. But I'm not getting where I need to be. So maybe you need to switch to or pivot to a plan B, right? So it's going to be up to you to decide. We can certainly guide you on that, but those are the questions to ask yourself. Those are the things to really reflect on and think on. And you know, Alex is now going to cover kind of moving to that plan B and what that looks like.
Thanks, Tom. So if you've done that assessment that Thomas just walked you through, and you've come to the conclusion that it is time for you to pivot to plan B, well, first of all, we want to make sure that the transition goes a little bit better than this. Up.
Yes! Here we go. Pivot! 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 Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Right, so I'm afraid that me showing this to you probably reveals a bit my age, but I hope that it has brought a smile to your faces. And if you've never watched this episode of Friends, I highly recommend that you do, because this scene is probably one of the best of the entire series. But more seriously now, if you've come to the conclusion that you have to switch to a plan B, I would assume that you probably feel, first of all, a bit disappointed. Some of you might even feel a bit distressed by this conclusion, because you've already spent a lot of time working on your plan A and it's not working, and you know, you might feel that you've wasted some time, and you might also feel that you now need to rush into your new plan. If this is how you feel, I would actually advise something very simple, and that's, you know, let's pause for a minute and let's go back to basics. And what I mean by that is, my apologies, let me just, what I mean by that is, let's revert back to the roadmap, and hopefully this is something that you're all very familiar with at this point. So just to remind you what it stands for, so ROAD stands for reflect, observe, accelerate, and drive. And I myself have been introduced to this model only a few months ago when I joined Hult, and I have to say I'm already a big fan of it for two very simple reasons. The first one is that it's a framework that encompasses all the big steps of any job search strategy. And the second reason is that it really deconstructs, you know, every of these stages into very, very simple steps that really allow you to come up with a very clear structure and you know, help you to have a very clear focus in your search. So I know you are probably very familiar with it already. So my goal here is not to tell you again what you've heard probably many times, but it's more to see how can we apply this framework to your plan B, to figuring out your plan B strategy. So let's dive in. So the first step would be reflect. So again, as I said, I can assume that you're probably feeling in a rush to just, put things into motion with your new plan. But I would encourage you actually to pause for a few minutes and really take a breath and take some time to think about things. It's also probably a good time to revert back to your targeted job search plan, another document that I hope you're very familiar with. Maybe you haven't actually looked at your targeted job search plan for a few weeks or a few months. So if that's the case, go and dig it out and have a look. Some people had already thought about a plan B when they started on their plan, and if that's the case, great. If that's the case, then great. But what has changed? Because since you last looked at it, you might be a different person. You might have met some new people who are now part of your network and can be, very useful connections for any job search. Maybe you've discovered things about yourself that you either enjoy or don't enjoy. So what has changed, in your plan B, or how can it be adjusted and completed? So that would be the first step. And then if you haven't had a chance before to decide on a plan B, then this would be the time to start thinking about it. And for you to do so, I would like you to ask yourselves a few questions. The first one is, what are your strengths? And I will actually be doing a bit of a deep dive a little bit later on this one. What are your interests? What are your personal and professional values? What do you enjoy doing? Because we want you to find a job, not only one that pays the bill, but also one that is meaningful to you, that you really feel motivated by, and that hopefully can give you also a sense of purpose. And what is your experience? What experience can you leverage to really show the sort of candidate that you can be and the added value that you can bring? So as promised, just deep diving on this element of strength, and I decided to take a closer look at this because I think it's really important, especially at a time when your confidence might be a bit shaken, that it's really important to be reminded of your strength. And I decided to show you this model also just to give you a bit of an example of the sort of work that you can do with your career advisor. So if you're finding it a bit hard because you're going through this stage and you're finding it a bit hard to really put a finger on your strength, then this is something that we can brainstorm with you, and then and we would be looking at five different areas. So the first one is, what are the strengths that you already know that you have, that maybe you use almost on a daily basis? The second one is, what are the values that people value in you? How do people usually describe you? If they come to you, what is it that they're looking for in you? The third dimension would be, based on your past achievements and success, what can it say about your strength? For example, maybe you never thought, you never saw yourself as a good negotiator, but actually you just completed successfully a big project, and to be able to complete it, you had to use some very strong negotiation skills. So maybe that's something you didn't even know you have, but that you're, finding out through this experience. The fourth dimension would be, what have you learned through tough times? We know that, sometimes when we're facing, obstacles in our life, this is when a part of our personality is actually being revealed. So things like resilience, I think, is the best example. So what have you learned from, some difficulties that you have faced in your life? And finally, what do you admire in others? And I find this dimension really interesting because you might think it's actually a bit weird. It's not about you, it's about others. But actually, if you are very conscious that you admire something about others, you are probably already acting in a way that would make you similar to these people. So what is it that you really like about others? So again, I just wanted to show you this because this is the kind of work that we can do with you. But also, I think it's really crucial for you to be very aware of your strength, because First of all, it will help boost your confidence. Second, it will help you to target jobs that you are suitable for. And finally, it will help you to present yourself, and you know, without obviously being arrogant or anything, but just really showing the sort of value that you have as a candidate, and the contribution that you can make to a company. The second dimension of our roadmap would be observe. And so after you've spent that time thinking about yourself, you know, it's time to open up and, you know, think externally. So it would be the time to be very proactive, doing a lot of research, reaching out. I think Tom has been covering that quite a lot. So, you know, the importance of doing informational chats, and really reaching out to people and building and maintaining that network. We have, we're living in a time at the moment where so many resources are available, you know, so many webinars and online courses, and all that information is at, you know, at our fingertips, and it's great. But if you start attending everything that is available, you also, you know, you also are risking to spread yourself thin, and potentially lose your focus. So I would say, yes, use the resources, but use them wisely and in a time efficient manner. So really choose cleverly what you will, you know, spend your time on, to make sure that, you know, it's focusing on the right things and that it can actually contribute to your search. Assess your skills. So if you look at what's available on the market, what are employers looking for at the moment, and do you have what it takes? If yes, that's great. How will you present it to really make sure that, you know, you show your full potential to employers? And if you don't, what is that gap? Can you, you know, can you fill it? Can you upskill a little bit to make sure that, again, you come across as the best possible candidate? And the third element here is, maybe it's a time to think a bit strategically. So where are the jobs at the moment? Again, I don't want to crush, you know, any dreams, but it's just, you know, we are in a time, you know, that is a bit strange. We know very well that some industries are being extremely impacted by COVID. Some of them are running as usual, and some of them are actually thriving. So having that information in hand is really important for you to, you know, spend the time, you know, in the right direction. And also think strategically, in the sense that your plan B is not necessarily something completely different. It can actually, you can keep your plan A in mind, and then just see your plan B as a useful detour, as a, you know, a middle step that ultimately will get you back to where you wanted to be, but just, you know, using a different path. So just sharing a bit of insight on this element of, I just wanted to share that. So these are the industries and the roles where some of our Hult students have been hired in 2020. So the industries that we're hiring and the roles that they were hired for. So we just wanted to share that just as a little guide, and potentially some help to have a starting point in your research, if that's useful. Our third element of the roadmap would be to accelerate. So it's a time to start putting things into action. So make sure that you are starting to get ready. So that would mean tailor your CV, even if you're doing a very small adjustment to your plan. Like, for example, I gave earlier the example of if you're changing your target geography and you're going back to your home country. Even that requires to adjust your CV, because some countries will require a photo, some won't. For some countries, you will have to put the information about your driving license or your marital status, or, you know, so make sure that you've done your research and that you tailor your CV, and that, you know, you only have one chance at making a good first impression, so you don't want to get those details wrong. And then obviously, if you're changing your industry and the role that you're targeting, then again, you will have to review everything, making sure that you really focus on what employers are looking for. You will also have to adapt your pitch and work on your narrative. So how will you present yourself to employers? And even during those chats that Tom talked to us about, you know, you already have to have this prepared when you meet people, even on a very informal basis. When I was a recruiter at BCG, I used to recruit MBA students who wanted to, join the consulting firm. So a lot of them were going through a career change, and it didn't really matter if they didn't have the, typical consulting profile that we would usually be looking for, as long as they had a very clear story about what they did before, what they wanted to do after. And if they had that very logical and flowing, story, they would catch my attention, and I would I would want to know more about them. So I know some of you will not be doing this major career change, but it was just to show you this, how important it is for you to have this narrative very clearly in your head, because then you will present it very nicely to potential employers as well. And you also have to start preparing for interviews straight away. So you still have access to this great platform called Big Interview. So this not only is it gives you access to this massive bank of questions, interview questions, but you can also specify the industries that you are interested in, and it will give you industry specific questions. So a really great way to practice interviews. And if you haven't looked at it yet, I would really encourage you to do so. And again, use your network. I don't think we can stress that point, more than that. It's so important. But again, like how will you reach out to people that maybe you already reached out to a few months ago and say to them, actually, I've changed my plan. How can you help me now that I'm targeting something else? And don't be afraid to ask about job openings that they've heard about, and also do not underestimate the power of the referral schemes. People who work for a company are always keen to refer people, because then they get a bonus for it. And companies are always very keen because it gives them a very easy access to what tends to be very high quality candidates, and at a much more cost saving way than if they were using recruiting agencies. So so I think referral schemes and asking about them to people that you connect with is definitely an avenue worth exploring as well. Finally, the last dimension of our roadmap would be drive, and that would be to start gathering information about the industry that you're interested in, and really understanding what's the industry benchmark, what could you expect in terms of salary, benefits, working hours, any information that puts you in a really comfortable position, so that when if the offers start coming, then you are already ready to negotiate. Right, and I think that's it for this part. And then I wanted to then focus on this. So it's all about the mindset. That's how I called it. But I remember being a recruiter, I could say very, very quickly if I was meeting a candidate who was only half motivated about applying, or was doing it a bit reluctantly. So I would really encourage you to think for a second, what is your level of motivation for this plan B? And is it as high as what you had for your plan A? And if not, what can you do? What sort of, what is your resilience, and how, what can you do to find the same level of motivation, enthusiasm that you had for your plan A and apply it to your plan B? Because I think that is quite important. And I know that it's a very easy thing for me to say, and probably less easy thing to do, which is why I wanted to talk about Vera, so that you can hear about a fellow student. So Vera is an MIB student in London. Some of you might know her already. She's always been extremely passionate about the luxury good industry. She even has some experience in that industry already. She attended about any possible event, and she even founded the luxury club in London, so that she could put that on her CV as well. So she was pretty much doing everything very well. And then obviously, because of COVID, the luxury industry was massively impacted, and she had to reconsider her options. She knew that she wanted at some point to re-enter the luxury market. So she decided instead to target other top-tier retail brands. And finally, a few weeks ago, she secured a job as a business developer at Miele X in Amsterdam. So for those of you who don't know Miele X, they are a really good company that specializes in home appliances. So not exactly what you have in mind when you think of luxury good. But I had a chat with Vera, and she had some very, she shared her story, you know, very well to me, and it was really interesting what she told me. And it was all about her attitude. She just decided to embrace this opportunity, you know, knowing that you can learn about, you know, any opportunity, any learning experience is useful. She also, very interestingly, went to one of her professors when she got that offer from Yale, saying, asking her professor, who had some knowledge of the luxury goods industry, asking her, if I accept this job, will I still be able to join the industry good market at some point? And her professor said, it will be more difficult, but it will still be feasible. So again, she decided to just embrace the opportunity and go for it. And I know Tom, you know, touched on it a little bit, but a few weeks ago, Tom and I were at an event with an alumni, recent alumni students, and one of them shared something really interesting. And he said, compare yourself to others only if it brings you something positive. So when you look at others, you can learn really interesting things. And as long as your comparison brings, you know, some learning and some positive things, do it. As soon as it starts just, you know, bringing you just stress or anxiety, then, you know, stop it and stop comparing yourself to others. So hopefully you can see their story only as an inspiration. I just wanted to say a very quick word on some of the common mistakes that we see of people who are doing that switch to Plan B, and most importantly, how to avoid them. So the first one is getting dispersed. And what I mean by that is people who are switching to Plan B, but are never quite letting go of their Plan A either. So they kind of end up, you know, working on both plans at the same time, and juggling, you know, the two plans at the same time. And you know, you are a bit at risk of, you know, again, spreading yourself thin, losing your focus if you do that. So I fully understand that sometimes, you know, if you see some things arising from your previous set that, you know, are starting to come to reality, that, you know, you don't want to let go of that. But I just want you to be very mindful that, you know, you typically, when you are very targeted, this is where you have the best chances of succeeding. And the second one is what we typically call failure to launch. And this is typically the situation when a student has a very clear plan in place, but for some reason, they're just not putting things into motion. So this is something that, you know, we can help with. So don't hesitate to come and talk to us about it. And then we can explore with you, what is it that is keeping you from actually putting things into action? And maybe there's something that is actually, you know, bothering you. And so, you know, we can explore that with you. So just be mindful of those two risks here. And if there's one thing that you remember about today's session, I would like it to be this, that we are here to help. So you can still book an appointment with your career advisors for up to 3 months after graduation. So please do use this resource, because you know, we can really help you. Even if it's, you know, emotional support, we'll you know, gladly do it. So please reach out to us if there's, you know, any way that we can be of support.